Good evening and welcome to our Dimelo Cinema Club. Tonight we're going to be watching a film called Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. Tonight we have some co-hosts. We have JP Saruno and Michaela. We have Steve Dez, and tonight the premiere of Chio. Tonight we're going to be talking about this film, but as we kick off, we're going to look at, it's a 2008 film. It is a documentary about a murder. I don't want to give too much away at the beginning, but it is definitely a heart-wrenching movie, a movie that definitely gets people talking. And the reason that I brought it to the Cinema Club tonight is because I have never talked about it with anyone. I happened to watch this a couple years ago by myself. It's something I remember, but I wanted to talk about it with a group. So that's why I brought it tonight. So let's kick over and get somebody's first impression. Let's start with Steve Dez. Steve, tell us about your first impressions of this film.
My first impressions. Oh my jeebies. I went just like Chris told and advised everybody to go and see this movie blind, no trailer, no nothing, which normally that's what I do anyway with pretty much all the films that we watch here. And wow, this one was a doozy. At first when it started, I was like, oh, okay, cool documentary, but why would I even get really invested in this? And then quickly when they were like, well, let me tell you what happened, boom, and they were using those very loud sound effects. I was watching this in a big TV with a surround system type situation, and it was loud. I bet you that my neighbors probably hated me, but it really got me into the story, and wow, what a crazy story this is. It reminds me of, if you've seen that Netflix documentary from the past called Making a Murderer, reminds me, give me a little bit of those vibes, even though this was probably done before that. So maybe Making a Murderer got inspiration from this one. So yeah, first impressions, crazy journey.
All right, let's go over and see Michaela. Michaela, what did you think about it?
Chris, who hurt you, and then why did you have to hurt us?
I wanted to see what people thought. I heard all different kinds of things. Yeah, so I was like, I got to see what people think of this.
No, definitely. I am definitely a true crime person. Like, the amount of times he will, like, just hear what I'm listening to while I'm, like, in the bathtub alone, vulnerable. And he'll just be like, can you just, like, listen to something nice? Not child murder, So I'm, like, tried and true in this genre. And I was shocked. And that's, like, saying something. And you can see how it ended up influencing the genre here on out. Because, like, honestly, I could only imagine the kind of stuff that they would be talking about if they could, like, actually have the time. Like, that's the only thing that kind of, like, I noticed in my first impression is, like, I don't think they had enough time to tell the story the way they really wanted to. But, man, what a story. Like, Canada, are you okay? Like, Jesus. That was my first impression.
Let's kick it over to JP. What did you think? Did you guys watch it together?
Yes, we
Okay.
did. So my first impression, I saw that was an MSNBC film documentary. So I can't tell you how relieved I was when there was no Rachel Maddow involved in this movie. Thank God. But no, I'm not gonna lie. Like, the first few minutes were rough, especially it's hard to critique a documentary, especially when there's no narrative involved. No, like how, like you want to critique on a movie based on, like, the only I can really critique on is perhaps the delivery of the film, which I thought, oh gosh, like the first 5 minutes of this movie, like the use of the shotgun sound effect, like every 10 seconds, like I get it, it's the shock factor, it gets you, it wakes you up, you're like, it's like starting on a roller coaster with, like, just out of 10. But I told Kay, I was like, someone has to fire the sound editor, which turned out it was Kurt. Like, he did the music and everything for the movie, so it was literally his movie.
Even the
What?
Even the credits.
Yeah, even the credits. Yeah, and just the pacing of it, like it seemed so quick, and I was wondering like what's with the dire need to make it so quick. I didn't really understood the pacing, and like thankfully it was consistent. It was always fast, so it didn't feel like once you got used to the ride, it was no longer jarring. Like that's just the type of movie that you're in. But oh my gosh, yeah, it's devastating. It's frustrating. There's a lot of things that I don't know. Like as someone who's just watching it from that perspective, I could see how it could be kind of like nutso and whatnot. I wish the movie was a bit more rounded on other things, but as we spoiler alert, semi spoiler, as we see in the movies, there's a lot of perspectives that we could not see and could not get into since they chose not to say anything or couldn't say anything. So yeah, overall, like it was a quick movie, really quick movie, but by God, does it hurt?
All right, let's kick it over to Chio. Chio, what did you think of this Chuckle Fest?
Chuckle Fest. Interesting choice of words. Well, I felt rage. Like I felt powerless to, I imagine how the main, how these people felt, right? And it's interesting that you say fast, because once I actually, in hindsight, I stopped and think about the actual, all of the events, I think the fastness of it, the urgency was demonstrated in the audio. It's like this sense of powerlessness, and then the urgency of the monologue, right? And it was just like fast, and it's almost like watching poetry but through a video, because it sort of gave me the feeling that if I were in that situation and I couldn't do anything about it, I want somebody to fucking hear me. You know what I'm saying? Like I want somebody, and I felt it through the audio, and I think it also, that home field vibe to it. I was immediately drawn into, oh, somebody's gonna tell me a story. And I like crime too, right? But I think it was the home field vibe that I was like, okay, I'm in. What do you have to tell me? And couple that with the urgency of, like, you know, how sometimes it was the words, just fast. I was like, oh, okay. And consistency, it was good because I managed to get the theme afterwards. But yeah, overall, rage, powerless to do something about it, and just a little bit of sadness, right?
Agreed. For me, I think I agree with what you guys are saying about the pacing. I think it is really fast. It reminds me, there's a scene in a movie called The Rules of Attraction with Dawson's Creek. I can't think of the dude's name, James Van Der Beek. And it's actually like, it's a dark movie with him as like a villain almost. He's like a college kid. And there's a scene in that movie where they show someone's life over like a 2-month period in about a minute and a half. And it felt like that. Everything was super fast. And that was on purpose in that movie. In this movie, he did it as well. I think a lot of what Steve said about the sound as well, and the vibrations of the way the screen was moving, it was so jarring that I wonder what the parents thought the first time they watched it. Like, I would almost think it would be too intense, and I wonder if there were conversations about that. That was part of it for me. Like, I feel like it was the guy's best friend, right? So saying it was exploitive at all is difficult for me. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that felt that the guy exploited his friend by making this movie because it was such a sad story. Do you guys feel like that at all?
Well, I mean, I think part of why it feels so jarring too is you also have to look at the timeline of how the crimes actually happened, you know, because like if you think about it, this all happens in the span of 2 years, literally, and he's doing all of this in 2 years. So I'm wondering if like that was just where his mind was at. On top of that, and I'm sure that since it wasn't like a more of a homemade thing to get distributed, they were like, man, this is the time allotted. This is all you get. And so he had to cram all of this into 1 hour 30. But yeah, no, like that's always the big question with stories like this and telling them is like, are we peering too close into these people's personal tragedies? And like, is the fact that we're telling these stories a good thing versus like, is it exploitative?
Yeah.
And at what point is it not? Because like, I feel like since this was so intimate and he showed so much about how much these people cared about the victim, because like I've seen so many other true crime documentaries where it's all about the horrible serial killer versus the people he actually hurt, you know? And like I think that he did navigate that. And what these people did go through, like I think he just told the truth of it. And unfortunately it was rough and very personal so quickly too. You know?
It's also crazy because it's insane. It was weird that you could see that the movie was being made actually while all this crazy shit was happening, because I'm sure because there was no way this guy knew that the legal system was going to take him as well as the family on a ride. So I'm betting in an alternate universe where things did go the right way legally speaking. This would have been a film just about Andrew and just how like Andrew is going to be missed out by all the people that he loves, by his son that he'll never meet. But then, because of all the crazy stuff that happens to Zachary because of the legal system, now this guy has to not only still put that in the movie, but then put in what happens to Zachary as well. So I'm sure, like that, I'm sure also did not help with the movie at all.
No, it's just like, think about it. You start off with like this very intimate story where you're trying to do something so that this child knows his father, and then all of a sudden your story becomes so much bigger in scope by something so horrible. Because that's literally what happened. And like, I want to know how long it took him to realize that the story wasn't about just this family, but something that ended up having to spiral into something so much bigger so that more people could be helped by it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I did not find it exploited. And the reason was, this is the second time I watched it. And I didn't think about it. I started reading articles afterwards, and that's when I read about that aspect. Like, some people took it that way. But the second time watching it, you realize that all the interviews are done in real time. So he never started doing things to try and lead it down a certain road. By the way that people are being interviewed, you can tell that it was like this was happening, and they were genuinely talking to Zachary at certain times, which really is more meaningful to me. And it really means to me, like, man, imagine what this guy is going through. He has this tragedy, then he has a second tragedy. He's making a film this entire time, and he's so honest about it while he's making the film. Like, he said multiple times, like, and I thought we were going to do that, and then this, and then I felt like this. I enjoyed that part about it, and I didn't feel that way. And the fact that the parents were so involved in the film, I feel like they were okay with how it turned out. I feel like he might have changed it if that was the case, just because he respected them so much, I would hope. What do you guys think? Yeah? That's how I feel.
I agree.
Jumping in right now, we have El Don Dino. Hi, Dino.
Hey, guys. I guess you guys done your first impressions. I don't think Chris should be able to pick a movie anymore. This is...
Oh, no.
That's basically what we've been talking about for about 12 minutes.
So heartbreaking. Just, yeah, it was. I don't have kids. I'm not married, but man, did that just, whew. And you know, it kind of tricks you. I'll say it tricks you because it starts with the dad with his kid, and I thought maybe that was the kid, right? I didn't get that it was the dad's kid and not Andrew's kid, Zachary. I don't know if anyone else kind of mistook that at the beginning. So I'm like, oh, okay, he survived. And then, yeah, there's like one thing out of another. Yeah. So, I mean, it was very interesting for sure. It's a lot of emotions in it. And I think it was extremely cathartic for especially the filmmaker. I can imagine the parents watching the documentary. I know you kind of said that probably would have wanted them to do it a certain way. But I just can't imagine the parents being like, you know what, we'll sit through this. But yeah, I don't know. That's just what I thought.
Yeah. I promise next time we'll do like Ratatouille or something like that. We're gonna have to do something that's a change of pace after this. We went through all those like super heavy movies, like that were like very action, and then we went to Big Bird, and then I brought us here. Again, part of it for me was I thought it was very interesting in the editing and everything, and I was like, I'd like to see what other people think of it, and I should have apologized and put like a little warning beforehand.
Absolutely not.
I was gonna-
Don't apologize for that. Like, I think this was like a very important stuff, and like that's what's beautiful about Cinema Club is that you do end up with material that you find challenging. Like, this is why we have discussions.
It wasn't
I
Havoc.
agree. Well, I think I did feel. I mean, you can tell. I don't know how, and I didn't get a chance to look up the filmmaker and what he's done and all that, but you can tell it's one of those early digital or DV cameras. But I mean, there's a lot of information. I finished. I watched it today, but I'm kind of
did show all those Paraguayan VHS he had.
Yeah. I know.
All them beta tapes.
Yeah, but yeah, I didn't. I did want to maybe go and see what his filmography was. I just didn't have time. I'm here in the farm now, helping out. I do want to say I think it's very important. It's extremely sad ending, but that the parents then kind of decided to become activists and kind of try to continue with that. I wonder where it has gone to. Hopefully things have fully changed. And there are some documentaries that I think, especially with how now with podcasts and murder mysteries and everything is now, like if this were to come out now, like it would, would maybe get more traction. But back then, like you were also saying, he had basically interviewed everyone while the kid was still alive, right? And then he had to go back and like get more interviews from certain people after the kid died and just the parents and all that. And that's, that really shows you kind of, it's one of the freshest kind of documentaries I've seen that is so kind of in the moment, right? That's why I kind of say like now with podcasts of stuff like that is very much someone could go and either do with podcasts or YouTube, especially if it's a really bad crime like that, murder, and they could be constantly uploading stuff, like that woman that, allegedly her boyfriend killed her. They were doing the whole van life and everyone just started getting online and doing all these things. So it's interesting to see a thing that was day by day in 2000 somethings before social media, that looking back, it would have a completely other meaning. It would be completely different, not knowing that, not knowing that the kid also would end up dead. It's quite something. I feel for me, it was a little jarring with the quick edits. That's why I think it's very cathartic for him, of just like quick edits and then just like the sound being put over each other and just like going quicker and quicker. I can also imagine how many hours of tape he had, not just of them as kids doing all those home movies, but then all the interviews. It's just like, whew, that's a lot of for sure.
Like I said, I think that he was given a very limited amount of time, judging by who distributed his movie. And honestly, considering that, like, you can tell that this was literally just made by himself, like that's kind of, like, the way that he managed to tell the story is kind of incredible, considering,
I think that was done on. To me, I felt like it was done on purpose. Like I don't think it would have had the success that it had if it would have been edited. And I'll go back to even the exploitive side of it. I think it would have been exploitive if it would have been done professionally, because then you have like now you're really thinking, right? Like now you're really editing. Now you're really like bringing in other areas of like film in order to like touch other parts of the industry, right? So I feel like it was raw, and every single aspect of it was raw to include the footage. But I wanted to chime in on the exploitive side a little more because you know how sometimes there's like unspoken bonds, right? Like I feel like yes, they had an unspoken bond of trauma, and they were going through this tragedy together. And then after the second murder, right, you now have an agenda. And I think the film, along with the activism of the parents, became that unspoken bond of I don't care how many heartstrings you have to push. Basically, we're going to use each other. I have a story to tell the world, and you have a way of storytelling. And we're going to, maybe they didn't say it like this, right? But it was that unspoken bond that brought them together. And in a way, is you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and we're just going to push. And I felt like they were both sort of using the medium to one push this agenda. And it sounds horrible, you know, because activism requires an agenda, right? You want to change something, but and you're using this medium to pull strings, like heartstrings, because how are you going to convince legislature? You gotta mobilize the troops, you gotta activate people, and sometimes it takes heartstrings to, you know, for people to get mobilized. So I don't know. I didn't find it exploitive. I think it was happening. It was raw, and it became a sort of thing. Yeah, scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Yeah, no, like, and that was something I did wanted to end up bringing up eventually was the law that they end up getting passed. Because, like, I mean, I'd have to, like, look into it, but, like, from the outside, it's usually the kind of law that, like, especially in America, would be very dangerous because it's about keeping the murderer accused under bail, or, like, not being able to get bail, which is kind of, like, what if they are actually innocent sort of thing. But also, like, it's just always interesting to see an opposite counter argument to what you think is right, especially when it is something that is a very valid point, you know? Like, it's not very often that I feel like I have my, like, morals challenged like that. Did anyone else feel that way?
I mean,
Totally.
I certainly got my morals challenged when she was able to basically get away without even paying a single cent of nothing. Like, that was very shocking to me.
Yeah, no. Also, like, I was confused about that too, because it's just like they did post bail, but how did, like, is it because the psychiatrist paid so much? Like, is that how bail normally works? It's just them, like, deciding, well, yes, you have $75,000 that you have to pay, but because you have a good lawyer, don't worry about it?
Well, she didn't even have a lawyer at that time, if I'm not mistaken. That's when she got the bail, when she left without having the lawyer. Totally, the bail thing is huge, especially like you said in the U.S. And it is the laws is kind of that thing where it would go right, almost crossing the line of what we think needs some sort of justice reform here in the U.S. But clearly there was like nothing in Canada. And I think the biggest thing that I just couldn't get past is how it's like, all right, so she gets off on bail, she gets out wherever. How's she able to like keep custody of the kid? And then the like, excuse me, that to me is the most mind blowing thing. Like because she was charged in the U.S., right? For and then just kind of skedaddled up to Canada. But you shouldn't be like a parent, a guardian shouldn't be allowed to have like 100% child custody while being, like on murder trial.
Capital One murder, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that was my thing where like, yeah, the bail, all that is kind of on a slippery slope, but just being able to like keep the child custody, just that's a huge red flag for me. But again, it could be
So much evidence showing that she was unstable, because that's the thing. It's like the fact that they had so many priors that they just chose willingly to ignore, and it's just like, who the heck? Like, I want to know who she was like sleeping with, because like all that treatment was like, I can't imagine like some poor like other person, like anyone else in that situation getting away with half of that stuff.
I would have been showing the footage at court. You see how she holds this baby? That's
Yes.
not.
Yeah.
And the fact it was nice. I mean, it was nice. It was nice having one of her other sons actually, because for the longest time, then I thought like, oh, she made up that she had other kids, right? Because it was like she had 2 or 3 other kids with 2 previous marriages. But then the one son actually kind of like spoke about it, was pretty powerful as well. You normally don't get that side of the family type of in some of these stories. Yeah. So yeah, for sure. So much was dropped the ball, and yeah, like someone's been married twice. Like she had all those.
I just realized that like a lot of that information was American, and we are stingy as fuck. So I'm sure that was a big part of why they didn't know about her priors with other relationships.
Because they were
Granted, they did mention while she was in custody that she was also violent. So even without that prior knowledge, she was still. She did have a history of threatening to cause self-harm in prison, like actually harming people in prison. It's crazy. It's weird because like the whole bail thing, like it is up to the opinion of a judge or whoever is in charge to like.
The gun information was shocking to me. Like they were like, yo, he got shot, all this stuff, and then like, yo, when you go through her records, like she got this gun.
She has a 22. She was using this ammunition at the range.
And she lied in the original call.
Yeah.
She was like, oh, yeah, give me the gun.
She lied in multiple calls.
I gave it to him.
Yeah. He must have shot himself 5 times.
Yeah, no.
Even I mean,
wives are so clumsy too. Like that's the thing, is like she wasn't a clever murderer. Like there's no flash and like there was no smoothness in this at all. Like that's what blows my mind, is like like she almost got away with it by being a complete fucking idiot.
She still got away with it technically, because
Did she? Is she in jail now? Like I didn't follow up on that.
She died. She died with a baby.
Yeah, she
that's right. That's right.
She jumped into the water with them attached to her.
Spoiler alert.
I actually didn't catch that. I didn't catch if she died or if she survived, but I did catch that, you know, the baby did die, but
yeah, she took a bunch of Ativan and jumped in the water.
Oh,
yeah, they did kind of glance over. Well, they didn't glance over it in the film, but you know, it
was quick though. I agree.
Yeah. It wasn't like
focusing more on Zachary. Like her death was just like kind of like an afterthought because she's not the victim here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Zachary was. So
100%.
To that point, I think this movie made in 2023, not by the guy's best friend, this would be like a Netflix like limited series over like 5 episodes, and they would have spent a lot of time talking about her mental health and how, while this was a terrible experience, I feel like nowadays they would focus more on, you know, because once they started going through the stories, I was like, oh my God, how did no one who knew her not step in and be like, we got to get her help, like in some way or another. And I know that's really hard to do, don't get me wrong. But to me, like the lens of like, clearly this is his best friend and being like, this is a villain. And yes, I mean, you could not make a bigger villain, don't get me wrong. But the mental illness factor in 2023, I would think would be approached differently when you were creating a series. And a lot of that, they would have spent a lot of time, I feel like, on that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And it doesn't help that, like, back in 2008, like, the stigma,
Sure.
it was so much worse then. Like, even then, like, people are still very uncomfortable with this idea, but back then, like, if you were outed as bipolar, that was a moral flaw,
Well,
And
I
what-
think the making of it's like making a murderer, right? It would be one of those kind of shows. I thought, because he brings up her psychiatrist at the beginning, and he's kind of like more on him later. So I thought he was gonna like deep dive into like him and the judge that did that and all that. But clearly, right, like you saw him calling and all that and wasn't able to get anywhere with that. I think that today, and with maybe how laws have changed, people will actually be able to like get in front of them, right? And maybe even open some of the records, maybe not the medical records, but some of the other stuff, and they would focus on that kind of thing, because everyone sees like, yeah, the what is it, the ball was dropped, whatever you want to call it. Like even that judge was like, if she just wouldn't have been let go out of jail these 2 times, like the baby would still be alive. And it's one of those things that, yeah, today I think they would, but today I think more than then. That's why I guess you were kind of talking about this before I got on the what's the phrase you guys on the not making money of it, but what are you
Exploitive.
exploitive. I didn't see this as exploitive at all. I don't know who wrote that book. Maybe the book is more exploitive, but because this was such a personal kind of thing, and again, I don't know what numbers this documentary did and all that, but I think now, and the way that Netflix has been pumping out all those criminal murder, serial, everything's just like everyone's all about these murder mysteries. I think it would be extremely exploitive this time. And the fact that if it were 5 episodes, yeah, they might spend more time on like the mental health and all that, but I feel like it would just have so much fluff, so much of that, just like, we're just going to repeat the same story. We're going to show the same pictures. So,
I would have liked to see more of the relationship between her and the judge, because that was weird.
Made
And
no
I don't.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the thing. It's just like we're missing her part of the story, and I'm not saying that like would have justified what she did. It's just it would have been interesting to have a little bit more of that background.
Yeah, was her last name Trudeau? Like what is it? What political connections does she have that led to her getting, you know what I mean, getting off on all these ways? Lawyers represent, clearly lawyers represent anyone, don't get me wrong, but even the way they were speaking about it wasn't just like, my client is innocent. It wasn't. It was clear that she had done these things.
Well, and not only that, but it's just like the way that the judge phrased a lot of the stuff was weird as fuck.
Mhm.
Like how like the tone almost came off as, but this is a bright young woman, clearly being like horribly like persecuted because she's a bright young woman with a future.
I'm sure.
Which was like so weird to me, because like, first of all, that's not usually how they would have framed that story. And second, it's just like, it was just a weird, like, how did she manage that?
I'm sure also, since Zachary was part of the equation, like, unfortunately, that probably played a role into it too. Because like, while watching this film, I couldn't help but think like, well, it is her child. I mean, any sane person would have like, no, like, if there's so much evidence against her, like, she has to stay in jail, wait till the trial goes, and then grant her custody back of the child after the fact, if she is deemed innocent. Like, in a perfect world, that's probably what would have happened. But I couldn't help but think, like, the entire time, like, well, like, yeah, if you bring up the fact, like, that's her kid, it's like, fuck, like, I could imagine how that just, throws a lot of stuff into, like, the cogs and gears of shit. But I didn't expect it to be as, like, complicated and, like, So like the grandfather said it best. Like it's so slow. They emphasize how many times just getting an answer that would have taken like less than a minute to say was postponed so many times in a span of weeks and almost months.
No, literally
Yeah.
months.
Yeah.
Literally months. They had a.
They you wouldn't believe that the judge said that about like, oh, she only killed the one person she wanted to kill, unless you actually like. I wouldn't have believed that. I was like, no way. But they had it in writing and they showed it, and I was like, what? She only killed the one person she really hated. I was like, what about the next person? She's gonna what?
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm saying. It's just like
Yeah.
they literally was like, well, she killed who she intended to kill, so she's not going to kill anybody else. Pinky promise. She's such a bright young woman.
Yeah.
And it's
Now,
like,
so
how? You're a
I-
judge. Like
Yeah,
you shouldn't have
and-
opinions like that.
No, and I also wondered why weren't the previous husbands brought to like testify? Like did they not testify?
They're in America.
They were American.
Like, I
Okay.
think that's like another aspect of the story that they couldn't really delve into because
Yeah.
I feel like since it did technically happen in two different countries,
Right.
it definitely huge, like really affected the outcome of this too. You know, because like I'm
again,
wondering why she got away with as much in that judicial system because maybe she was claiming persecution from another country. And really pushed on that. It was like, well, they don't even know if I did it. They just say that I did because of all this evidence. And, you know, like she framed it differently. And I'm wondering if that's part. But see, that's why I'm very curious about what happened on her side of the story, you know?
So I think based on other documentaries, Michaela, based on what you're saying, I agree with you a lot right there because even like cheesy ones like the Tindler Swindler and all, all of that stuff happened internationally and it was difficult to get the person in one area. But then you start looking at these documentaries about these Nazi people who were like the Nazi death camp, runners, and then they come to America and hide and then they get caught. But then there's all this jurisdiction issue where those people never get prosecuted because they didn't commit the murders in America. So definitely I get the international part of what you're talking about. It's really difficult when you start dealing with multiple jurisdictions internationally, it seems. From at least what I saw in other documentaries.
I hear you guys talk about. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just adding.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say I'm listening to you guys talk about, the judge and the language and this and it sort of brings me back to an area of interest that I've read on before. It's like the biases in the court system, right? So many of us have heard, for example, if you're a male, you tend to be looked at differently in the court system. If you're a mother, you tend to be looked at differently in the court system because there's this inherent biases within our court system. It's a flaw, right? It's a social flaw that we have. And I'm almost wondering, right? Yes, she was a woman. And studies show that normally women tend to be looked at harsher than men. But one thing that we have here is the doctor element. She was a prepared, college-educated woman. And I'm wondering if within the social biases that we have in society, if that played a role. So did that card trump anything else? And I was like, well, this is an educated woman. She is a doctor. So there's no way that she could have done this. There must be more to the story. I'm just speaking from like that justice side. So
100%.
it would be nice to have a follow-up on the justice side and maybe explore that side of what went wrong, what evidence they didn't look at, and maybe what social biases played a role into how they handle this case. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, you bring a great point out, and I feel like part of the judge, like if I'm mistaken, the judge wrote that in the part of the reasoning of kind of letting her go and like all that. It's like, well, she's a doctor, like she's a very smart. Or was that the filmmaker that kind of implied that? I thought it was also part of the written
It
part.
was in there. It was in the court
Yeah,
documents.
that's what I was saying when it was just like when I was explaining that it's just like the tone was so weird because it was very much like that hate. Oh, what was his name? Like when like the swimmer. Who,
Yeah.
Very similar. It's just like, well, yeah, he maybe did it, but he's young and made a mistake.
Yeah.
You know, like it had that kind of tone to it, which I thought was very interesting because she wasn't a student. She already graduated. She's not that young.
Yeah.
You know, so it was just like all of the things that normally would have counted against her, especially in our country, seem to have become a boon almost, which is weird.
I think it still has to do with the fact that she was
Pregnant.
a new mother.
Mm-hmm.
Like even after she had Zach, I made things even a lot more complicated.
But like you would think that the very tiny detail of the fact that the man that she's accused of murdering is the father of that child might, I don't know, inform other key decisions. Because like that's not something you just kind of glaze over. Or am I wrong about that? Like if I was reading,
no, you're not, and I agree. Also, that it was very much a young white athlete in college or high school that does. There's a case in SDSU just this past year of rape from student athletes, and they didn't really they withheld the investigation and all that, and one of them became NFL punter, and just now they finally released that thing. And so there's this whole thing like, oh, it's gonna ruin their career, oh, it's gonna ruin their whole lives, and it's like, well, so it very much felt that way of like, how is she getting treatment? But on that same point of the biases, one thing I don't think you guys have mentioned or we have talked about it is the race, right? If she were a black woman or a Latina woman, or if it were male, for sure, I think they would have already been locked up. And I think that's kind of what we alluded a little bit of the whole issue with bail and everything else, right? That the people that are affected the most or are not allowed bail are usually African American and Latino people. So I was thinking that the whole time. I was like, holy shit, like this lady was able to just like get the benefit of the doubt, time and time again. And with like so much proof, there's like so much proof everywhere. Like it was just insane. And I think that's, again, another thing that easily can be investigated or has been. But yeah, I think a follow-up, or I'm definitely going to try and read up a little bit about it, but maybe during the day so I don't get extremely depressed before going to sleep. That's for sure.
I'm glad Jay didn't come. I hope he didn't watch it for his birthday.
Yeah. Well, he might have, right?
I guess one other thing, I was going to hold this till the end, just so you guys know, there's a 14-minute epilogue. So there is a story that comes, it talks about the making of the movie, a little bit more about like dives into like how the laws were changed. You get to see the dad more. There's definitely, it's short, but if you type in its 14-minute epilogue of this movie, and they did make something. I don't want to give too much away because again, it's probably good for you guys to check it out. But again, it kind of gives you a sense into how the movie was produced and why it's so short. It has to do with like it didn't get into a bunch of film festivals. None of the ones in Canada. I wonder where that came from. It didn't get into Sundance. It got into something called Slam Dance, which you guys probably have more. Do you know what that is? It's Park City, Utah. I didn't know what it was prior to this. I know you guys deal with a lot more film industry stuff. So it's called Slam Dance, which is like American Sundance in Utah. And it got into that. And that's how it got picked up by MSNBC. And that, again, led to a lot of those Canadian, I believe they're called senators in Canada, to them really looking into this because of the way, Chio pointed to before of like, there was an agenda, but at the same time it worked. You know, it got people to get interested in this cause, and maybe the spin on it helped. But the one last thing I was going to say is, you know, Michaela, you brought up a really good point about, you know, the way that we were looking at that person. I wonder too, were the lawyers or the judges and all listening to a person who was saying, I was about to have a child with this man, and he broke up with me. And then if you remember, like, Andrew didn't have the nicest words to say sometimes when they refer to his vocabulary. So she's saying, like, you remember, I think right at the end they were saying when she was breaking up with him, he was saying like, fuck this bitch and blah, 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 blah. And I wonder if a lot of that came out in the trial too. And they're like, oh, of course, you know, like, this is totally wrong. But at the same time, she was clearly a crime of passion, you know, like, you know, starting to lead toward that road too. I mean, clearly she drove 1,600 miles to do it, but you get...
It's just like, I don't know. It's just like the special treatment that a lot of this, like, these individuals in general seem to have. Like, it's kind of just like, wow. Be a white professional, man.
Yeah, 100%. It is messed up.
One of the things for sure that I appreciated, again, going back to like the rawness that like Chio was talking about this film, was the two moments that I felt so connected to this film, going like, wow, this is so raw and real, was when, the mom is just devastated and the dad is like, fuck her, and just lets that rage out.
Mm-hmm.
And then when literally he goes like, I literally thought about killing her. Like, when my wife is taking a pill and like all this stuff, and he explained basically all his thought process. Like, that was woof.
Even at the beginning of the movie, Steve, he talks about how when Andrew dies, beyond like who the murderer was and everything, they were like, we didn't even know yet who it was. And immediately we're like, let's get on a plane, let's go home and kill ourselves. Do you remember that? Right at the beginning, the parents were saying like, we immediately like, what's life worth living at this point? I mean, you know, when you start talking about the parents, that aspect, like, it's tough. It was one of the best parts of the movie. The reason it's so good is because you get to see so much about Andrew and his parents and their relationship. Like, when they're making those movies and they let him curse, they let him smoke, and he's making sex jokes as like a 15-year-old in the movies. And then all of a sudden they're like, and the parents got involved, and they're like, you bastard. Like, in the movies, it was so great to see like a family that was like that and just having fun with each other. And like, that drew me in so much more. I grew up in like an Irish Catholic family. Like, we didn't curse in front of each other. My mom probably still thinks I'm a virgin. So, but in the end, that was a different thing, you know? And like, to me, that led me into like, really, oh man, the parents, like, you couldn't create more amazing people.
Well, and like, what also really sucks is they did everything by the book to the point of extremism. And I think that's what makes this such a hard thing, is they played by the rules and they got burned so hard.
Not
Twice.
only
By those rules.
Yeah.
You know?
right.
Dude, she was calling and saying like, did you hang up the pictures with me and Andrew in the frames after she murdered their son? Like, and then they went and like swam in a pool with her. They went to birthday parties. Like
they had to have like this almost intimate relationship with her. And it's just like I'm just thinking back to how like my parents handled their divorce and like how weird custody battles were with them, you know, and like no one died in that situation, and they could barely like have two sentences without like going at each other. And it's just like, this is someone who literally killed their child, and they're just sitting there having birthday cake. Like, it's the most normal thing in the world. Like, like, what if Zachary, like, it's just, I couldn't imagine having to do that for so long. I couldn't have done it. I don't think I could have.
Not only that, they had to drive with the kid to visit her in jail.
Like, I was like, how is that a custody thing? She's in jail. How did they have to agree to that kind of bullshit of whatever? Like, again, it's still there's a lot to talk about the race part of it as well, and that goes, same thing in Canada. But what in recent history, in the past couple of years, how many mass graves of the First Nations, the Native Americans, from Canada, of kids in these kind of like go away homes, and they're it's this we have all these ideals of, I know I'm getting into racism stuff, but that it's only in the US, but clearly Canada is also has those issues. And again, there's either biasm, elitism, or whatever, right? And no one likes someone else.
That's a big part of why the laws failed so hard.
Yeah.
And
And no
because
one,
of that systematic change, and then once it turns out that it ended up hurting the people it wasn't supposed to hurt, then it became an ordeal.
yeah. And just the idea, right? I guess you're right, of like, no one likes someone coming into their home and telling them how to do something, or that you need to fix something, even though it's like, so much
Well,
truth.
that's another crazy thing too. She was asking them to like feed her.
Yeah.
Like we're bringing her groceries and diapers, and like she's a doctor.
And I thought, well, she was clearly not working at that time if she just got out of jail, probably. But I'm like, also like, how is that not put into evidence? I thought like, ooh, they're smart. They were recording those conversations and just be like, this mother isn't able to provide for the kid. Like, let us provide for the kid. We are, it's so frustrating. I mean, it's
spoiler alert. In that 14-minute epilogue, they tell you that they were taping all those conversations. That's how they had all those conversations. And afterwards, the dad would go on and go, all right, that conversation happened at 3:10 p.m. today. Clearly, she's blah, 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 blah. And they had that in case they needed it for court. They talk about that, too. I forgot to bring that up. It was interesting to see that.
Well, we see them, like, press the record and all that. They had footage of that. So I assume that's what it was for, because they were just like,
yeah,
we want to make sure there's always an extra person, And then even that, when they talked about how she tried to claim that they stayed with her, with the baby over the time limit and did treat it something or other, and the lady in charge was like, no. And I was like, oh, good, they're going to catch her. They're going to finally get the baby. And nothing really happened out of that. They were like, we have all this, you don't want to piss off the person in charge to make sure that the baby is fine. I mean, it didn't come to it. Nothing came out of it. It's crazy. Hopefully, hopefully something like this hasn't happened and won't happen again.
It'd be interesting to have a person on the podcast that was from Canada to get a perspective of that. But clearly racism privilege is evident here, like no matter what. Yeah. So anyway, I'm glad I brought it because I was like, I wanted to see what other people thought of this movie. I was like, it was a rough one. If you didn't cry during this movie, you're not a good person. I'm sorry, but at least once. Oh no, she's looking at JP like he didn't cry. He was just turning his head.
Oh, he was really close. He was really close. He was drunk for me.
I'm just kidding. But yeah, man, it was a tough get through for me. And I know I was gonna have my girlfriend watch it with me the second time, and I was like, she'll be done in 5 minutes. She'll be like, I can't do this. I just can't do. She can't watch an episode of Law and Order when someone gets shot. So I know she wouldn't have made it very far into this.
Yeah.
All right, I guess, do you guys want to delve into final thoughts? I think we're there.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else they want to bring up?
No.
All right, so I guess let's dive into final thoughts. Let's let Dino go first. He came in last. Let's let him send us off first.
It's again,
he's recommending it to
powerful.
Everyone.
it's very powerful. Some of the editing for me seemed a little like very disorienting. Disorienting, is that the word? Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, that's probably how they felt, right? That's why I think, like, for the filmmaker more than anyone else, especially after the kid also, once he found that the kid also died, I think that really made it more of a, personal project. I kind of, yeah. And, yeah, it's like, I want to say, like, I couldn't even come. It's a good documentary just because it's such a horrible story. It's yeah, there were definitely a couple times where I teared up for sure. And then, when the granddad is trying to be like, don't let, like, kind of like trying to get her to stop crying for like a certain reason, and him also like kind of breaking down, and just like that, just kind of frustration, right? It's so powerful. I think, I wonder if this is shown in any law classes or studied, right? Like, is this something that's kind of being studied or looked at, as not necessarily for the film's sake or the documentary's sake, but just for the case, the situation, international, law or whatever. But yeah, I don't know who I would recommend this. I don't know. This is like next level masochism to like I just don't know who I'd recommend this to. It'd have to be like, if I were to really get into someone who talking about, how much they're into murder mysteries and podcasts, I'd be like, well, have you seen this? Because I just don't know. I just couldn't recommend this to anyone. Be like, even though it's like an hour and a half, take an hour and a half and make yourself feel worse about life and humanity. I just couldn't do it. But it's a good documentary. But I don't know who I'd recommend it to. That's it.
I'm writing apology emails right now. Why don't we go over to Stevie's right next to you?
Oh God. Final thoughts. This is quite a roller coaster of a movie. Definitely, if after this review, for some reason you haven't seen it and you're watching this, watch it with the volume a little lower, because I think I exaggerated on the volume maybe, or those sound effects were very, very intense, because when there were gunshots, oh my God, did it sound like I was getting shot in my house. And one sound effect that now, especially after the review, I keep thinking about is the ticking. There's tons of ticking of a clock. And to me, it represents not only the time that was not only invested to make this film, the time that they spent trying to resolve this case, but the time of life that you don't know if you're going to live to like your 30s, 40s, or 14 months old, and you got to appreciate every moment as much as you can, because everything can just turn in a drop of a dime, and you got to appreciate that stuff. So it's a very intense and powerful documentary and film. Who would I recommend? Just like Dino, it's very difficult for me to like say I'm going to recommend this to someone. Maybe someone that's really into murder mystery stuff, possibly, and likes that type of genre. That's the only people I can think of. But yeah, final thoughts. It's jarring. It's crazy. It's quite a reality that, even though years have passed from that, it's still something that is still pretty much happening in the system that's in the world, at least between the Canada and the States. So yeah, those are my final thoughts.
All right, JP and Michaela, one of you, rock, paper, scissors. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I would also like to add that I'm glad that Morning Joe was also not in this documentary.
We need the levity, man.
Well, okay.
You're coping, I know.
It's fine.
You're coping.
MSNBC, it's okay. It's not a bad news network. It's hardly news. It's not a bad news network.
Why we can't have nice things, guys.
God damn it! This movie's depressing. No, it's like, yeah, like definitely. If you're into true crimes, if you're an activist, you will definitely really you'll find something in this film. But it's so it just it rips your heart out, especially when, because if you go in without the information, without knowing what is gonna be the end result, like you feel the frustration of those grandparents trying really hard to find the best interests for Zachary, because they knew that this was like, we need to get justice for our son, we need to get justice for Andrew, and you see that with everyone who was in Andrew's life. But then as soon as Zachary is into the picture, it's now about we're trying to try to save Zachary too. And to see that all that suffering was all for naught for Zachary, regarding Zachary. And then of course using that tragedy to try to help bring about change so that this doesn't happen again. It's devastating. It's a hard movie. Like it's a great movie because like they don't do too much fluff when it comes to Andrew, like, but I think them not knowing that the kid was going to be in the picture and having somewhat hope of continuing Andrew's legacy through the kid, you without you knowing what happens, you're given that false hope too. So it's like, fuck, like, yeah. So yeah, it's a tough movie, and thank goodness Brian Kilmeade is not in this movie either. Just kidding. Go ahead.
No, like I kind of agree with JP when it comes to, like, if you really want to see how bureaucracy fails and how you can actually have an effect on it, this is a good film for that. But this isn't something you suggest for someone to have fun. And it's a good piece of journalism. It really is, at the end of the day. So if that's something that you want to appreciate, this is a good film for that.
Gio, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think I listened to your advice, Chris. I was like, okay, do not find any, don't go in, don't dig in, don't do any research. I went knee deep without any prior knowledge, and it took my breath away, right? Because I was like, you broke my heart once, and then you break it up again, but this time you throw it in the fire and spread my ashes. Like, it was that dramatic, right? And I think I would totally recommend it for those that are. I say to students who are either practicing law, maybe who are like studying psychology, filmmaking, right? Because even though it was done in the days before social media exploded, it sort of gives you a second or a minute by minute playbook, right? Like now with the advancement in technology and everybody carrying a phone and fancy cameras, we can get basically a chronological uh, order of what's happening in a person's day to day, and this person just happened to immerse himself into that family and capture a chronological order of the events. So it's kind of interesting to see a minute by minute play in the days before social media really exploded. So yeah, I definitely recommend this to any students, and I feel like if you really truly want that awe gasping effect. Don't do any research until after.
All right. My final thought is I have movies that I love, and I would say my top 5 favorite movies of all time changes. It does. Over time, it changes all the time. And things that I loved from the past, I love back. Things like Cool Hand Luke is one of my favorite movies of all time. It reminds me of my dad. So it's always in my top 5, but I don't know what number it is and things like that. And I think if you're a true movie lover, that things evolve for you and change over time. But I have to say that this is by far, I believe, the movie that has most affected me. The movie where when I started it, by the end, I was like, boom. And that's why I brought it today, because I was like, this is the thing that has affected me most, and it's real. We didn't talk about this part, but like they get into so much, of like when Andrew died, and how the parents had like to go identify him, and when they walked with Zachary to the furnace because they couldn't do it with Andrew, and like all I kept thinking at the very end of watching it a second time is, dude, I wonder how many people, some people that I even know, who have been through that experience, just identifying a family member in that kind of a way. And like, I don't even think about that because I haven't been through that process in the same way. So for me, I thought it was important to talk about something that it's the movie that has most affected me by far. So that's why I brought it tonight. And Steve, you don't have Jay.
No, it's his birthday. So
I know. So, Steve, what? I don't know.
JP, does the question for Steve?
Oh, sure. Steve, what do you got for us next week?
Okay, after all those noises, I don't know why you asked me. You should have just asked yourself because it's your turn for next week.
Yeah, it is my turn. For next week, I hope you guys got a Roku stick because we're watching Weird, the Al Yankovic story. I'm just kidding. It's one of these movies. These are all movies based upon films that we have seen in the last round. These are all movies made by other filmmakers. Like for our number 1 is Bitter Sweet Soul from the director of Old Boy. We have number 2, which is Creep Show from the creators of Day of the Dead. We have number 3, Swiss Army Man from the Daniels. And number 4, we have Iga from the writer-director of R&R, also known as The Fly. Number 5 is Follow That Bird, starring, of course, Carol Spinney. And number 6 from Kurt, who wrote and directed the movie that we just saw, is Shuffle. So it's going to be one of these 6 movies. We're not going to vote. I'm just going to do another play at chance and roll a die.
Oh, okay. I was because no movie might win more votes than any other because we don't have that many people. So yeah, roll the die.
Ready up. I'm going to use my little wooden die. All right. And the movie that won is number 1. Number 1. Which one's number 1? Bittersweet Soul from the director of Old Boy. And this one might be a record for us. This movie is a short documentary compilation. It is only an hour long.
Wow.
I like that.
All right. Yeah. Sounds good then, I guess.
So for Michaela, JP, Chris, Gio, El Dondino, me, Steve, That's TV. We'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.
Happy birthday, Jay!